Attendant mocks black girl's braids, gets fired after realizing she's a civil rights attorney. Picture a crowded hotel lobby in Washington, D.C., buzzing with excitement on the eve of an influential civil rights conference. Among the guests is Pugan Friedman, a poised black woman with intricately braided hair that cascades elegantly down her back. The air crackles with possibility leaders are converging to discuss social justice reforms, new policies, and the future of equal rights in America. Yet, in a moment that stuns onlookers, a dismissive hotel attendant singles out Pugan, mocking her braids in front of everyone. Little does he know, Pugan is a civil rights attorney. His cruel remark lights a spark, igniting a chain of events that will shatter prejudices and topple reputations. Pugan Friedman was born in Detroit, Michigan, a city shaped by the hum of factories, the rhythms of Motown, and the legacy of social activism that once echoed through its streets. Her parents, Henry and Clarissa Friedman, embodied determination, constantly teaching Pugan that resilience is in our blood. These words became Pugan's mantra from a young age. Henry worked long hours in a local auto plant, while Clarissa ran a small day care center out of their modest home. Though the Friedmans never had much money to spare, they were rich in family spirit, laughter, and a strong sense of justice. On Sunday mornings, the Friedman family would dress in their best for church. Clarissa always styled Pugan's hair in neat braids, woven with colorful beads that clicked and clacked joyously whenever she moved her head. It was a simple tradition that brought Pugan and her mother closer. With each pass of the comb, Clarissa would share a piece of family history, recounting stories of Pugan's grandmother marching alongside civil rights leaders, or Pugan's great-aunt who fought to integrate a local school in the 1960s. These stories weren't just tales of the past, they were part of Pugan's identity. They taught her from the outset that she stood on the shoulders of giants who had resisted hatred and worked for equality. In the Friedman household, mealtimes were sacred. Even if Henry came home late from an extra shift at the plant, the family would wait, warming the pot of collard greens on the stove or keeping the cornbread under a foil wrap until he arrived. They would hold hands, say grace, and talk about everything from Pugan's school day to current events in the world. Pugan always had a vibrant curiosity, her eyes lighting up at any mention of social justice or big ideas. By age 10, she was already dissecting news articles and reading about Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But Pugan's path was not without obstacles. As a teenager, she often faced teasing about her hairstyle, her beloved braids, which she would decorate with subtle gold cuffs or colorful ties. Some classmates claimed her braids were unprofessional or too ethnic, ignoring how ubiquitous and beautiful Afro-textured hairstyles truly were. Each time Pugan was ridiculed, she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Resilience is in our blood." She learned to transform that hurt into determination. She read widely about systemic racism, about the countless battles waged by unsung heroes, and she grew more certain that her life's purpose was to fight for justice and equality. After graduating at the top of her high school class, Pugan was accepted into Howard University, one of the most prestigious, historically black universities in the country. She felt proud and nervous stepping onto campus for the first time. The sense of history was palpable. As she walked beneath the trees that lined the pathways, Pugan thought about all the great minds that had shaped activism and scholarship at Howard: Toni Morrison, Stokely Carmichael, Thurgood Marshall, and so many others. It was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. However, Pugan found her stride by joining the debate team and volunteering at a local legal clinic that offered free advice to low-income residents. She was in awe of the mentors at the clinic, lawyers who went out of their way to explain the complexities of law and how it could be wielded as a tool for social change. She spent evenings in the stuffy rooms of the clinic, reading case files, preparing briefs, and witnessing the power of advocacy. Many of those who came for help were victims of discrimination or were drowning in legal procedures that they barely understood. At Howard, Pugin also made lifelong friends. She bonded with Tasha, a brilliant political science major who dreamed of becoming a senator, and Darius, an economics major who aspired to help black communities secure economic independence. Together, they formed a small study group that would meet late at night in the library's quiet corners, sipping on cheap coffee and discussing everything from Supreme Court rulings to community organizing strategies. They pushed each other to think more critically, to read more widely, and to act more boldly. Although Pugin was now in a space that celebrated black excellence, her braids remained a personal statement, a subtle refusal to compromise her roots. Some older professors, products of a different era, would sometimes imply that she might look more professional if she changed her hair, but Pugin stood firm. For her, braids weren't just a hairstyle, they were a testament to her cultural heritage and her personal identity. In the face of subtle disapproval, she wore them confidently, day after day. Her time at Howard passed swiftly, fueled by passion and intellectual rigor. By the end of her undergraduate journey, Pugin was determined to go to law school. She had witnessed how legal frameworks could constrain or liberate people, how a well-written brief and a well-argued case could shift the societal ground beneath one's feet. The next logical step was Howard University School of Law. She excelled there too, graduating with honors and an unwavering commitment to civil rights. Fresh out of law school, Pugin landed a position at the nationally renowned NAACP Legal Defense Fund, headquartered in New York City but deeply involved in cases across the country. She worked under the guidance of seasoned attorneys who had spent decades battling discrimination in employment, housing, education, and voting rights. This was Pugin's dream job. She found herself in the thick of it all, drafting legal briefs, challenging unjust laws, researching civil rights precedents, and traveling to different states to support local activists. One of her earliest triumphs came when she joined a lawsuit against a local government that had tried to shut down polling sites in predominantly black neighborhoods ahead of a crucial election. Pugin and her team argued in federal court that this targeted site reduction amounted to voter suppression, an unconstitutional tactic. The day the judge ruled in favor of her clients, Pugin felt her heart swell with pride. Tears of joy filled her eyes as she realized the impact of her work. Thousands of people would have access to a fair voting process because she and her team had stood up for them. Pugin's reputation within the legal community began to grow. She was known for her meticulous research, her calm but tenacious court demeanor, and her unwavering dedication to justice. In the years that followed, she took on dozens of cases across the country, from fighting for police reform to challenging discriminatory hiring practices. At each step, Pugin's braids remained a visible symbol of her identity and her commitment to honoring her ancestry. She rarely had time to rest, but she felt energized by the knowledge that she was walking the same path her elders had cleared, forging new ground where necessary. The calendar turned to early spring, and Pugin received an invitation to speak at a civil rights conference in Washington, D.C. The event, held at the lavish Starlight Grand Hotel, coincided with a major national discussion on voter protection laws. Keynote speakers included famed civil rights leaders, senators, and lawyers from organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union (ACLU) and the NAACP. For Pugin, It was more than just another speaking engagement. It was a chance to network, to reconnect with friends from Howard, and to influence legislation that was taking shape on Capitol Hill. When Pugin checked in for her flight at LaGuardia Airport, she did so with her trademark braids shining under the terminal's fluorescent lights. She was wearing a navy blue suit, crisp white blouse, and sensible heels, nothing out of the ordinary for a business trip. Striding confidently through the corridors, she mentally reviewed her speech points. She planned to address the history of voter suppression, recent developments in various state legislatures, and the next steps activists could take to protect voting rights for marginalized communities. Her flight to DC was uneventful, and soon she found herself in a taxi weaving through the busy streets. Monuments and national landmarks flashed by, each a silent witness to the nation's storied history of conflict and progress. When she stepped out in front of the Starlight Grand Hotel, Pugin was struck by its grandeur. The gleaming marble lobby boasted tall columns, gold-trimmed decor, and a chandelier that sparkled like the night sky. It was clearly a place where high-profile guests congregated for conferences, galas, and lavish events. Pugin entered the hotel just after lunchtime. Bellhops in sharp uniforms hurried to assist arriving guests, while front desk clerks smiled politely. Standing behind a sleek podium in the center of the lobby was the head lobby attendant, a man named Dustin Drake. He was tall and had a practiced air of elegance about him, slicked back hair, immaculately polished shoes, and a nameplate on his vest that read Guest Services Lead. He greeted every new arrival with an almost musical intonation, offering to guide them to check in, show them around the premises, or answer any question about the area's attractions. The moment Pugin stepped up, Dustin's polite smile froze. His gaze darted to her braids, which were styled today with subtle golden cuffs. There was a barely perceptible sneer that curled on his lips, a tiny flicker of disdain that Pugin's sharp eyes didn't miss. She had grown adept at reading such micro-expressions. At first, Pugin tried to dismiss it. She had encountered enough dismissive looks in her life to not let them rattle her. Perhaps he was just having a bad day. "Hello, good afternoon," Pugin said politely. "I am here to check in. The conference registration suggested I speak with the main desk or the concierge. Could you point me in the right direction?" Dustin didn't answer immediately. His eyes traveled up and down Pugin's braids before he finally spoke, with a tight-lipped smile. "Yes, of course. Just take the path to the left. You'll find the main desk. They'll help you with your room." "Thank you," Pugin replied, and started to walk away. But she heard him mutter something under his breath as he turned to an equally well-dressed colleague. Pugin caught the words "those braids" and "unruly." She felt a knot form in her stomach. She was here for a civil rights conference. For heaven's sake, the last thing she needed was open disrespect in such a supposedly sophisticated establishment. However, Pugin forced herself to stay calm. She had a long day ahead, with panel discussions and networking events. She could not afford to let a small-minded individual derail her focus. Pugin proceeded to the front desk, where a polite young woman named Clarisse checked her in without issue. Clarisse was warm and respectful, making small talk about Pugin's flight and the gorgeous weather outside. Pugin appreciated that not everyone in the hotel treated her with the same disdain Dustin seemed to harbor. She accepted her room key and instructions for the conference's schedule. "We look forward to having you here, Miss Friedman," Clarisse said, sliding over a glossy brochure detailing the hotel's amenities. "Please let me know if there's anything you need." Pugin thanked her, relieved that this interaction was pleasant. As she wheeled her suitcase toward the elevators, she couldn't shake the unease caused by Dustin's sneer. It wasn't as if Pugin had never encountered prejudice before, but it was disappointing that, even at a high-profile hotel hosting a major civil rights conference, some staff could still harbor dismissive, perhaps racist, attitudes. Her room was on the 14th floor, offering a panoramic view of the city. Pugin smiled, impressed by the plush bedding, the tasteful decor, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Washington Monument in the distance. She allowed herself a moment to relax. She had arrived safely, her presentation materials were all in order, and she even had a bit of time to unwind before the evening's networking cocktail hour. Later, dressed in a smart, knee-length dress and wearing her braids pinned up in a graceful bun, Pugin descended to the ballroom. She checked in at the conference desk, received her name badge, and mingled with fellow attendees. The atmosphere was electric, filled with lawyers, activists, and policymakers who were eager to share their ideas for furthering civil rights. Pugin was in her element, moving from conversation to conversation with an easy confidence. No matter how prepared she felt, she knew she could always learn from others who had fought on the front lines. Toward the end of the evening, Pugin glanced toward the grand lobby. She saw Dustin again, speaking to a small cluster of guests. Even across the vast space, she could feel his watchful eyes. Anytime a black guest walked by, Pugin detected a shift in his expression, a faint condescension that seemed to slip through his courteous facade. She saw him offer a luminous smile to a wealthy white businessman, only to turn away a moment later and sigh impatiently at a young black couple who approached for directions. Each microaggression was subtle, but Pugin's sensitivity to such behaviors was well honed. She decided not to escalate matters tonight. Part of her recognized that confronting Dustin would be draining, and there was little chance he would be fired just for an offhand comment or two, as she lacked evidence. She vowed to keep an eye on him, though. If he continued to exhibit disrespect or discriminatory behavior, Pugin would not stand by silently. The next morning, Pugin rose early, determined to make the most of the conference. She had a panel discussion at 11 a.m., but there was a breakfast roundtable starting at 8. Heading downstairs in a stylish but professional ensemble, her braids neatly gathered, Pugin felt poised and ready to tackle the day. She walked past Dustin's podium, where he was speaking with another hotel guest, a white woman wearing a crisp pantsuit. Their conversation seemed pleasant enough. As Pugin neared, Dustin quickly ended his conversation and stepped in her path with a curious smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, madam. How can I assist you today?" His tone was overly bright, almost sing-song. Pugin blinked, taken aback by his sudden attentiveness. "I'm heading to the conference breakfast. It's in the Jefferson Hall, correct?" "Oh, yes, indeed." "Right this way," Dustin said, gesturing down a long corridor. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, as if bestowing some insider knowledge. "They do have a dress code of sorts. You're fine for now, but for some of the more exclusive events, I'd recommend something a bit more formal, and perhaps a hairstyle that is more in line with professional standards." Pugin felt her pulse spike. There it was, the subtle jab at her braids. She tightened her grip on her briefcase and forced herself to remain calm. "I'm perfectly comfortable with my hairstyle," Pugin said. "If any changes to my appearance are needed, I'll let you know." Dustin pressed his lips into a thin smile. "Of course, ma'am. I'm just trying to be helpful. Some of our high-profile guests expect a certain, how shall I put it, standard of decorum." She stared at him, 1,000 retorts swirling in her mind, each sharper than the last. One half of her wanted to lay into him right there, to expose him for his prejudice and ignorance. But she had a morning panel to prepare for, and a heated confrontation in the middle of the lobby wasn't how she wanted to start the day. Without another word, Pugin moved past him, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She heard him mutter under his breath again, something about people not understanding hotel etiquette. Pugin's face grew hot, but she kept going. Anger flared inside her, anger, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been devalued because of their natural hair, their culture, or their heritage. During the breakfast roundtable, Pugin tried to refocus on the discussion at hand, new strategies for protecting voting rights, yet her mind kept drifting back to Dustin's smirk. It wasn't merely the insult itself that bothered her. It was the principle of the matter that, in 20th honest century America, people could still belittle natural black hairstyles as unprofessional or unruly. The same biases Pugin had combated in her teenage years were right here, in plain sight, at a high-end hotel hosting a civil rights gathering. She sipped her coffee, forced herself to engage with the other attendees, and did her best to set aside the encounter. But Pugin's frustration simmered. By the time the round table ended, she was brimming with determination. She wouldn't let it overshadow her mission at the conference. Far more pressing issues were at stake for communities around the country, but she also refused to let Dustin walk away unchallenged. Her opportunity arrived later that morning. After her successful panel presentation, Pugin had delivered a rousing speech detailing recent court battles, the importance of grassroots mobilization, and the role lawyers could play in fighting voter suppression laws. The audience had applauded enthusiastically, with some approaching her afterward to express their gratitude and admiration. As she returned to the lobby, Pugin spotted Dustin again at his podium, greeting a small group of guests who were checking in for the day. This time, Pugin decided to approach him directly. She calmly stood to the side, waiting until he finished speaking to the guests. When Dustin finally noticed her, he gave a slight start, as though he'd hoped to avoid her. "Miss Friedman, hello again." "How may I assist you?" he asked, in a tone that feigned politeness. "I want to speak with you about the comments you made about my hair," Pugin said quietly. Her voice was measured, but firm enough that a few nearby guests turned their heads. Dustin's expression hardened. "I'm not sure I understand." "Oh, I think you do. Telling me my braids aren't professional and suggesting that I should adopt a different hairstyle that is completely inappropriate and rooted in racial bias. I would appreciate it if you refrained from further comments about my appearance." A spark of defensiveness flared in Dustin's eyes. "Ma'am, I am not racially biased. I was merely trying to inform you of the hotel's dress code, which is standard for all guests. If you felt offended, I apologize, but there's no reason to make this about race." The subtle emphasis on "you felt offended" made Pugin grit her teeth. "My hair is appropriate for any environment, corporate, academic, you name it. If you have a concern, you can direct it to me in a professional manner, but implying that braids are out of line, that's discrimination." Dustin stiffened. "I can't see how it's discrimination. The hotel is proud to welcome guests of all backgrounds. We're used to hosting important events for—" He paused. His eyes flicked to Pugin's conference badge, which read, "Pugin Friedman, Civil Rights Attorney." He swallowed. "Events for all sorts of people." "Clearly," Pugin said, her voice growing sharper, "there's a gap between your stated policy and your personal behavior. Now, I have important engagements to attend. I'm asking you to cease the disrespect and treat every guest here with the same courtesy." With that, Pugin turned on her heel and walked away. She could feel her heart pounding, fueled by the adrenaline of confrontation. Dustin's face had gone pale, his poised demeanor cracking just slightly when he realized she was a civil rights attorney. But Pugin had more pressing matters to handle. She had done her due diligence by warning him. If he persisted, she would file a formal complaint. Word of Pugin's encounter with Dustin spread quickly among some of the conference attendees. The civil rights community, tightly knit and always on the lookout for injustices, was not about to stand by while one of their own was insulted. Rumors circulated about Dustin's remarks, with some claiming he'd also made derisive comments to other black guests. A small group of activists suggested staging a silent protest in the hotel lobby if the situation wasn't resolved. Meanwhile, Pugin had meetings with policy advisors and legal experts on Capitol Hill to discuss the potential ramifications of a new voting rights bill. She spent much of her day off-site, immersed in legislative discussions, but her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from fellow conference-goers asking if she was all right and whether she wanted them to intervene. Although Pugin appreciated their concern, she focused on the fact that she was in DC to protect people's fundamental rights. A personal scuffle, though aggravating, would not overshadow her mission. But the issue refused to die down. By the time Pugin returned to the hotel in the evening, tension hung in the air. Several of her colleagues from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund were waiting in the lobby, bristling with indignation. They informed Pugin that the same attendant, Dustin, had made another dismissive comment to a woman wearing a head wrap. He had allegedly asked whether she was intending to keep that on indoors, which came off as another racially insensitive remark. "It's unacceptable," said Linda, one of Pugin's senior colleagues. "This is 2025, not the Jim Crow era. We deserve better. I'm going to file a complaint with hotel management." Pugin nodded. "I'm with you. Let's do this systematically. We'll gather statements from anyone who experienced or witnessed his behavior. We'll present it to the manager on duty. If the hotel fails to take appropriate action, we'll escalate." Within an hour, Pugin and Linda had collected several testimonies from guests. The accounts painted a picture of Dustin's pattern of behavior, his forced politeness toward black guests, his pointed criticisms about hair and attire, his overall condescending attitude. Pugin wrote a concise summary, including the times and dates of each incident, and requested an immediate meeting with the hotel's general manager, James Russell. James Russell, a balding man in his 50s with a firm handshake, welcomed Pugin and Linda into his office. The space was tastefully decorated with photographs of the hotel hosting various dignitaries over the years. A faint scent of leather and lemon polish lingered in the air. Russell listened carefully as Pugin and Linda laid out their complaints, each more damning than the last. Pugin explained in detail how Dustin had insulted her braids and then tried to deny any racial bias, as well as how he had questioned another guest's head wrap. Linda chimed in with statements from other attendees. When they finished, Russell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked troubled. "This is the first time I'm hearing such complaints about Dustin. He's been with the Starlight Grand for nearly 3 years, with positive performance reviews. I am truly shocked." Pugin met his gaze. "Mr. Russell, I appreciate that this may come as a surprise. However, unconscious bias or even outright prejudice can exist in workplaces undetected until there's a tipping point. We're here to report that tipping point." Russell nodded gravely. "I understand. First, let me offer my deepest apologies to you and everyone else who was disrespected. The Starlight Grand strives for an inclusive, welcoming environment. I will personally investigate these claims. If they hold true, rest assured, we will take remedial action. We do not tolerate discrimination in any form." Linda handed over the folder containing statements and notes. "We look forward to hearing the hotel's official response." Russell took the folder and stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "We'll move on this swiftly. Thank you for bringing this matter to my attention." As Pugin and Linda left the office, Pugin felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Would Dustin really face consequences, or would the hotel simply close ranks to protect him? She tried to push the doubt aside. At the very least, they had made it clear that this behavior would not go unchallenged. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Pugin delivered a keynote speech at the conference, expertly weaving together historical anecdotes, legal analysis, and calls to action that left the audience on their feet in applause. She helped draft a preliminary policy proposal that would serve as a blueprint for upcoming legislative battles over voting rights. On the surface, her time at the conference was a resounding success. Yet the tension with Dustin lingered in the background. Each time Pugin passed through the lobby, she could feel his hostile gaze, even though he no longer said anything directly to her. She noticed that whenever a white guest approached, Dustin's polite facade snapped back into place. He would beam and offer them the best table at the restaurant, or the quickest check-in line, or a friendly chat about local sights. But if a black guest showed up, Pugin sensed a palpable chill in his demeanor. On the conference's final evening, a formal gala was held in the hotel's grand ballroom. Attendees donned elegant attire, floor-length gowns, tuxedos, and everything in between. Pugin wore a stunning maroon dress that flared at the knees and had a subtle shimmer. She styled her braids in an elaborate updo, each plait carefully twisted and pinned to create a regal crown. Throughout the night, she networked with politicians, attorneys, and activists, forging alliances that would likely shape civil rights litigation for years to come. All seemed to be going well, until Pugin stepped out of the ballroom around midnight to catch her breath. The hallway was quiet, illuminated by soft, recessed lights. As she made her way back toward the main lobby, she spotted Dustin leaning against the podium, rubbing his temples as though nursing a headache. He glanced up and saw Pugin. In that moment, something snapped. Dustin seemed to forget his professional veneer entirely. He straightened up and approached Pugin, his face contorted with anger. "You just had to make a big deal out of it, didn't you?" he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. Pugin's eyes widened. "Excuse me." Dustin pointed a trembling finger at Pugin's braids. "All I did was suggest you wear a more appropriate style, and now I'm under investigation. You're trying to get me fired for doing my job." Pugin felt her muscles tense. She raised a hand defensively. "I never wanted anyone fired, but your remarks were discriminatory, and not just toward me." Dustin pressed on, his voice growing louder, echoing through the empty corridor. "My remarks? Discriminatory? You people and your twisted sense of entitlement. You come in here with your activism and your braids. Excuse me." Pugin could hardly believe what she was hearing. "And you think you can just bully me because I'm a hotel attendant, because you're some high-powered civil rights lawyer? Well, guess what? I have rights too. You can't ruin my career." Pugin took a step back, glancing around for security. She was incredulous at the outburst. "Dustin, you're digging your own hole here. If you want to talk about bullying, you should start with your own attitude toward guests who don't look like you." Dustin's face was flushed, and a thin line of spit glistened at the corner of his mouth. Before Pugin could say another word, a figure emerged from around the corner, James Russell, the hotel manager. His expression was thunderous as he strode toward Dustin. "What on earth is going on here?" Russell demanded, his voice reverberating through the hallway. Dustin froze, his anger dissipating into shock. I was just... Russell turned to Pugin, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Friedman, are you all right?" Pugin nodded, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I'm fine." Dustin here was expressing how he felt about my complaint. Russell's eyes flicked to Dustin. "Is that so? I'll need you to come with me to my office immediately." Dustin tried to bluster. "But, Mr. Russell, she's lying. She's now..." "Dustin," Russell barked, leveling a furious glare at him. He gestured for Pugin to follow them, but she held up her hand. "It's late, Mr. Russell." "I think you have enough information to make a decision. I'll be in my room. If you need a statement, just let me know," Pugin said, her voice quiet but steady. Russell nodded. "Understood." Pugin walked away, her legs feeling suddenly heavy. She realized she had been holding her breath. The hallway behind her filled with hushed arguing as Dustin sputtered excuses to Russell. Pugin suspected that Dustin's unhinged outburst had just sealed his fate. The following morning, Pugin woke to a note slipped under her door. "Your presence is requested in the general manager's office at 9:30 a.m. James Russell." She glanced at the clock. It was already 8:45 a.m. Pugin quickly got ready, rebraiding a few loose strands that had come undone overnight, and dressed in a charcoal grey suit. Her flight back to New York wasn't until later in the afternoon. so she had time to handle this final piece of business. She arrived at Russell's office to find him waiting with a cup of coffee, his demeanor more composed than it had been the night before. Linda was also there, along with a few other hotel executives Pugin had seen milling around the property. "Thank you for coming, Miss Friedman," Russell said, standing to greet her. "We've concluded our investigation into your complaint and the incidents that followed." Pugin nodded, folding her hands in her lap. She braced herself for a standard corporate response, maybe a half-hearted apology, an empty promise that they'd look into it, and a request for Pugin to keep things quiet. But Russell surprised her. "We have decided to terminate Dustin Drake's employment at the Starlight Grand Hotel. His behavior last night was the final straw. It was highly unprofessional, and given the other testimonies we've gathered, it's clear he has engaged in discriminatory and harassing conduct toward multiple guests." Pugin took a moment to process this. "Thank you," she finally said, genuinely. "I appreciate the swift action. I hope this serves as a learning experience for the entire staff." One of the hotel executives, a petite woman with a tidy bun, interjected, "Miss Friedman, we want to extend our sincerest apologies. This does not reflect our values. We'll be instituting additional diversity and sensitivity training for our employees." Russell nodded. "We would like you to know how seriously we take this matter. We're also offering you a complimentary stay anytime you're in DC in the future. We appreciate your business and we deeply regret the distress this caused." Pugin was silent for a moment. She didn't want to sound ungrateful, but she also didn't want this to feel like a payoff. "Thank you. My goal was never to get someone fired. I only wanted to address the discriminatory attitudes and ensure they wouldn't continue unchecked." Russell's voice softened. "I understand. But the blame lies with Dustin and his unwillingness to change his behavior. Please know that our entire team has been put on notice that such conduct is unacceptable." With that, the meeting ended. Pugin left the office feeling an odd mixture of relief and sadness. She didn't revel in someone losing their job, but she couldn't deny a sense of justice. Dustin's actions had been brazen and harmful, and the hotel had taken a necessary stand. News of Dustin's termination spread quickly among the conference attendees. Many expressed gratitude that the hotel had done the right thing. Others lamented the broader reality that, for every Dustin who faced consequences, countless others remained free to perpetuate microaggressions in workplaces around the nation. Pugin checked out of the hotel and headed to the airport, her suitcase rolling behind her. As she waited to board her flight back to New York, she scrolled through her emails and social media. Messages poured in, some from friends who had heard about the altercation, and some from strangers who had seen brief posts about the incident on Twitter. Among the messages was one from a longtime civil rights activist, praising Pugin for her courage to confront discrimination head-on. Another was from a young woman who said she had always been afraid to wear braids to work, fearing it would be seen as too black. Reading these messages, Pugin felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her. It was about challenging the norms and prejudices that had oppressed black culture for generations. When Pugin finally boarded her flight, she leaned back in her seat, gazing out the window at the bright DC skyline in the distance. She couldn't help but think of her grandmother's stories about marching for voting rights decades ago. How proud her grandmother would be to see Pugin forging her own path, not just in the courtroom, but in everyday life, standing against even the smallest forms of discrimination. Back in New York, Pugin Friedman returned to the familiar rhythm of her work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. As she sat in her small yet bright corner office, a space cluttered with legal briefs, half-empty coffee mugs, and an ever-present stack of civil rights case files, her mind flicked between the urgent matters on her desk and the recent events at the Starlight Grand Hotel. She found it hard to shake the memory of how a seemingly polished environment, steeped in luxury and professional courtesy, had harbored someone like Dustin Drake. Despite the hotel's public-facing image of inclusivity, a pernicious thread of prejudice had simmered behind the marble lobby and plush carpets. Pugin busied herself with research for a new lawsuit challenging racially biased hiring practices in a Midwestern manufacturing firm, but each time her phone buzzed or a new email arrived, she half expected another note about Dustin. She wasn't entirely sure why she felt so restless. After all, justice had been served, the hotel had taken swift action, and Dustin was no longer in a position to harass people. Yet something about the incident left her unsettled. Perhaps it was the reality that this was just one confrontation in a vast sea of injustices. Countless other Dustins existed in boardrooms, schools, restaurants, courtrooms, and countless public and private spaces. Later that week, Pugin finally carved out time to reflect more deeply on what had happened. She poured herself a cup of strong tea, an old family habit, and gazed through her office window at the bustling New York City streets. The hum of traffic below merged with the pulse of a city that never slept. Why did the Braids incident feel so personal? She asked herself. Because it was, she finally admitted. For as long as she could remember, her hair had been a potent symbol of both pride and defiance. As a child, she would sit on a stool in her mother's kitchen, giggling while her mum gently braided her hair and told her stories about the civil rights movement. Those sessions had taught her that her hair, her heritage, and her identity were inseparable, and they were all worthy of respect. A few days after her return, Pugin decided to write an op-ed detailing her experience at the hotel. Rather than naming the Starlight, Grand, or Dustin, specifically she wanted to avoid potential legal blowback. She structured the piece around a core theme, the policing of black hair in public and professional spaces. She recounted moments from her life where teachers, classmates, or even well-meaning acquaintances had suggested her braids weren't appropriate or professional. Each time, those words had echoed the deeper message that her natural blackness was somehow unwelcome. Now, as an attorney, Pugin understood just how deeply rooted these biases could be. She took special care to situate her personal experiences in historical context. She wrote about how laws in some states had once forbidden black people from wearing their hair in public in certain ways, and how workplaces, even today, sometimes enforce rules that punish black employees for wearing locks, twists, or braids. She cited examples of students being suspended from schools for refusing to cut their natural hair, as well as popular media's criticism of professional black women who refused to straighten or chemically treat their curls. In every instance, Pugin typed, this focus on black hair as a problem or a distraction is a glaring vestige of white supremacy. It is the insidious echo of a legal and social system that once sought to erase our identities and label our features as inherently inferior. It reminds us why the fight for civil rights is never truly over, and why we must remain vigilant in every sphere of society, hotels, schools, offices, and beyond. The op-ed was picked up by a well-known online magazine that specialized in social justice commentary, and within 24 hours it became one of their most read articles of the week. Thousands of people shared it across social media, tagging Pugin with messages of solidarity. Black men and women from all walks of life recounted their own stories. A woman who'd been told she couldn't wear an afro to her college graduation. A young man criticized for braiding his hair in an upscale corporate internship. Even a teenager whose guidance counselor had pressured her to adopt a neater look for her yearbook photos. The emails that flooded Pugin's inbox were both heartbreaking and galvanizing. Some recounted overt forms of racism, others told of subtle microaggressions that chipped away at self-esteem over months or even years. One email came from a high school student who read Pugin's piece, just minutes after being scolded by a teacher for wearing colorful box braids. I felt so alone, the student wrote. But now I see there's a bigger fight, and I'm not the only one who thinks this kind of policing is unfair. That line stuck in Pugin's mind. I felt so alone. She remembered that feeling from her own youth. And yet, seeing how her story could reassure someone else felt like the best kind of victory. A week later, Pugin was invited to appear on a local talk show that aired throughout the tri-state area. The producers asked her to discuss the broader implications of workplace discrimination and the historical policing of black hair. On the morning of the taping, Pugin carefully arranged her braids, deliberately letting them hang free to underscore the statement she was making. The set was a swirl of lights and cameras, but she remained calm, well prepared. Sitting across from the host, Pugin recounted her personal run-in with the hotel attendant, speaking in measured tones about its significance. Yet what truly captured viewers' attention was her willingness to lay out how often these incidents go unreported, how many people simply endure microaggressions and never tell a soul. In the following days, clips from that segment went viral online. People across the country began tagging Pugin on social platforms, engaging in heated yet constructive debates about racial bias, inclusivity, and the right to show up as one's full, authentic self at work or in public. Some media outlets tried to sensationalize the story headlines like "Civil Rights Attorney exposes racist hotel attendant." But Pugin did her best to keep the conversation focused on solutions and awareness, rather than fueling outrage alone. Meanwhile, Pugin's mentors and colleagues at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund embraced her growing visibility. Senior attorneys encouraged her to leverage the momentum of this moment, reminding her that public awareness could be a powerful force in pushing for legislative and cultural reforms. "We have to fight in the courtroom, sure," one colleague said, "but we also have to shift hearts and minds outside it." Buoyed by the widespread response, Pugin teamed up with a few prominent activists to launch an online campaign. The campaign urged institutions, schools, corporations, hotels, and more to adopt clear anti-discrimination policies that specifically protected natural hairstyles. They drafted sample guidelines that HR departments could use to ensure that hair-based discrimination was explicitly banned. The initiative resonated with a surprising number of organizations, some of which reached out for further consultation. A mid-sized tech company on the West Coast even asked Pugin to host a virtual workshop on cultural sensitivity. She smiled to herself as she prepared her presentation slides, realizing that what started as a painful encounter was now catalyzing tangible progress in workplaces she might never have touched otherwise. A few weeks into this flurry of activity, Pugin found herself looking out at the illuminated skyscrapers one late evening after a long day. The city lights shimmered like a vast glowing tapestry, each pinpoint of brightness hinting at thousands of lives and untold stories. She knew that for every person stepping forward to share their experiences, there were still countless others, too fearful, too ashamed, or too tired, who kept silent. She couldn't help but think of all the times she herself had been tempted to let an insult slide, to walk away rather than stand her ground. Yet the Starlight Grand Hotel incident had shown her that even one firm stance against prejudice could reverberate far beyond its original moment. Seeing the depth of pain and the spark of hope in the emails she received reaffirmed her conviction. The personal was political, and politics could be deeply personal. One woman's braids had become a symbol of broader fights for dignity, identity, and respect. In quieter moments, Pugin felt a pang of sadness about how Dustin's story had ended. She didn't delight in his downfall. People could change if given the tools and the genuine desire to do so, but she also understood the necessity of accountability. No matter how much Pugin believed in second chances, she recognized that destructive actions had consequences. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind: a lesson can be painful for the teacher and the taught, but sometimes it's the only way to learn. And so, Chapter 14 of Pugin Friedman's journey was as much about the collective reaction to her stand as it was about her own introspection. She emerged from the ordeal more confident than ever in her ability not just to handle adversity, but to transform it into a vehicle for broader social change. The uncomfortable incident at the Starlight Grand Hotel had opened up new avenues of dialogue about hair, identity, and the hidden biases lurking in everyday spaces. It also led Pugin to double down on her commitment to creating a more equitable society, one legal case and one conversation at a time. She wasn't naive. She knew that deeper reforms required system-wide shifts, that hearts and minds don't change overnight. Still, as Pugin stood on the threshold of her office late one evening, lights off, coat in hand, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a clarion call for unity and respect. Her braids, far from being a point of shame, were now the centerpiece of a national conversation that refused to let anyone's culture be dismissed or demeaned. Tomorrow, the struggle would continue in courtrooms, in corporate boardrooms, in schools, and on the streets. But for tonight, Pugin Friedman let herself breathe. Resilience is in our blood, she reminded herself, closing her office door behind her. And with that final thought, she embraced the power of her story, fully aware that she had only just begun to tap into its true potential for lasting, transformative change. While Pugin's star continued to rise, Dustin's fall from grace was swift and severe. Word around Washington, D.C., was that the Starlight Grand Hotel had made an example of him, not just firing him, but also blacklisting him from any sister properties under the same corporate umbrella. Unable to secure a favorable reference, Dustin found his job prospects drying up in the hospitality industry. For a few months, he disappeared from the public eye entirely. Then, in an ironic twist, Pugin discovered a letter in her office mail. It was from Dustin, forwarded through the Legal Defense Fund's address. The envelope was battered and the handwriting uneven. Inside, a short note read, "Miss Friedman, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to say I'm sorry. Losing my job forced me to examine my biases. I realized I was holding on to resentments and stereotypes that I had no right to put on others. I know I cost myself my career, and I hurt people. I can't undo the damage, but I'm going to therapy now, and I'm learning. If nothing else, I hope you know I regret my words and actions, Dustin Drake." Pugin stared at the note for a long time, passing its sincerity. Part of her felt compassion. Everyone has the capacity to change. Another part of her remembered the venom in Dustin's eyes, the hatred in his voice that night. It wasn't her place to absolve him, but perhaps it was enough that he had recognized his wrongdoing. She filed the note away, uncertain if she would ever respond. In the weeks that followed, Pugin's achievements reached a new pinnacle. She was nominated for an award by the National Bar Association for her outstanding service in civil rights advocacy. She continued to travel the country, litigating cases on behalf of marginalized communities, appearing on panels, and working tirelessly to expose discrimination. Through it all, her braids remained proudly on display, an outward sign of her resilience and identity. Her story of confronting prejudice at the Starlight Grand Hotel was told and retold, inspiring younger generations of black lawyers and activists. People began to see Pugin as more than just an attorney. She was a symbol of standing one's ground with grace and assertiveness. Months later, Pugin revisited Washington, D.C., this time for a high-level meeting with senators about a federal voting rights bill. As she strode through the newly renovated corridors of the Senate office building, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Each echo of her footsteps served as a reminder that while the fight for justice was endless, it was also profoundly rewarding. She recalled her confrontation with Dustin, the sense of humiliation she had initially felt, and the surge of determination that followed. The memory reminded her of a lesson she had carried since childhood. Resilience is in our blood. Each moment of adversity had led her to a place of greater strength. If her braids once symbolized her personal heritage, now they also symbolized her hard-won victories over prejudice. Standing in a hallway adorned with portraits of past leaders, Pugin closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her grandmother, her parents, her mentors at Howard, and the trailblazers who had marched, protested, and litigated before her. Yes, she thought, resilience is in our blood, and it always will be. She opened her eyes, lifted her head high, and walked forward into the meeting room, ready to argue, ready to protect rights, and always ready to be who she was, unashamed and unbowed. The story of Pugin Friedman and her brave stand against subtle discrimination reminds us that true change often begins with everyday moments of courage. From childhood lessons on resilience to landmark legal battles, Pugin's journey shows how deeply personal actions can ripple out to create wider social impact. Prejudice can hide in polished settings, but speaking up, even when it's not convenient, exposes and dismantles oppressive attitudes. If you were inspired by Pugin's determination and the powerful outcome of her story, let's continue spreading the message. Remember to like this video, share it with friends who could benefit from hearing about her triumph, and subscribe to this channel for more thought-provoking narratives. By joining together, we amplify voices fighting for justice and equality. Your support helps keep these important conversations alive, so let's stand strong, stay vigilant, and keep moving forward.